So this video is about biodiversity. Biodiversity is the first syllabus objective in Unit 3, Topic 1. And the syllabus objective says that you need to be able to recognise that biodiversity includes the diversity of species and ecosystems. So first of all, let's look at the word biodiversity. It's got two parts. Bio, of course, that means life. Diversity, well, what does that mean? It kind of means variation or difference. So biodiversity is a measure of variety of life. Now, we look at biodiversity in three different ways. We look at it in terms of ecosystem diversity, and then we also have species diversity, and then we've got genetic diversity. Ecosystem diversity is variation in different ecosystems in a geographic area, or variations within the same ecosystem. And species diversity is the number of different species in an ecosystem, whereas genetic diversity is actually differences within a species. So variation in the genetics of the organisms within a species. Ecosystem diversity is different ecosystems. Species diversity is different species. And genetic diversity is differences within a species. So ecosystem diversity, variation in ecosystems in a geographical area, or different parts of an ecosystem, variation within an ecosystem. So here we've got like an Australian bush type ecosystem here. But there's different abiotic factors at the top of this cliff than there is on the cliff or down here next to the creek or river and on the river bank as well. So these are different habitats or different parts of the ecosystem. We have a riparian zone here. We have an aquatic ecosystem. We have a cliff type ecosystem, and then we've got a different ecosystem up here. So diversity within an ecosystem, or within different ecosystems within a geographical area. Species diversity is different species of animals or plants or other organisms within an ecosystem. So we've got different types of plants here within the one ecosystem. Now, species diversity can increase and it can decrease, so it's not actually fixed. Of course, we have species that immigrate and emigrate from an ecosystem, but as well as that, we can have new species develop over time through a process called speciation. So if you imagine we've got an original population, they're all the same, and then there's a geographical barrier forms, much like that river in the last slide. Over many years, thousands of years perhaps, geological time, if there's differences in the abiotic factors on either side of that barrier, there may be speciation that occurs. So two different species form. So that would increase the number of species, but equally, a mechanism that can decrease the number of species is extinction. So the number of species is not fixed. And then we've got genetic diversity. So variation in the genetics and the DNA within a species that can present with different characteristics. And these different characteristics can be helpful at times. We'll talk about why biodiversity is important now. And it comes down to ecosystem services. Things that different species do contribute to the ecosystem and the health of the ecosystem. So this is an example here of barnacles. Barnacles are filter feeders. So these feather-like things they catch the organic matter that's moving around in the water. So, but that's how they feed. But the service they provide to the ecosystem is that they actually clean the water, clean the oceans. And then we have, these are sea squirts here. They're also filter feeders, so they also clean the ocean. But as well as that, they create a habitat, a microhabitat by their surface area. So all of these little spots in here, you can see we've got some green photosynthetic organisms here on top, as well as that all these little nooks and crannies are a nursery for small marine life to grow. We have worms here that have a number of different roles. Firstly, they're decomposers, so they break down dead organic matter and detritus. But as well as that, they also break up and aerate the soil. And here we have nitrogen fixing bacteria. So they're in the nodules, or they're nodules in the roots of plants, and their role is to fix nitrogen. They take nitrogen out of the atmosphere and make it into nitrates, which the plants can then use. So different species provide different services to the ecosystem. The more diverse the ecosystem, the more efficient it is at providing these services. You start removing species from the ecosystem, then they're less likely to be able to do these ecosystem services, and the ecosystem can break down. So that's ecosystem diversity and species diversity. But genetic diversity, how does that fit in? Why is that important? Well, it's about variation within a species is important for species to be able to handle change. The best example of that I can think of is these things called the peppered moths. So you can see this white-coloured peppered moth is really well camouflaged against this white tree trunk. Yet here's another variation of the peppered moth, which is almost black. And you can imagine up against that white tree, it's going to be less camouflaged and more likely to be predated and picked off. However, during the Industrial Revolution in England, these trees got covered in soot because of all of the factories belching out smoke. So it turned out that it was the dark-coloured moths that actually had the advantage, the camouflage, and it was the white-coloured moths that were picked off and predated. So you can see that variation, genetic diversity, creates variation in the characteristics of the organisms of a species, and that allows them to better handle change. So that's biodiversity. Variation within life. Ecosystem diversity, species diversity, genetic diversity.